So trading can often be positioned as something that's quite complicated, a bit of a dark art, that's difficult to understand what you should be doing. But the process of trading is actually quite simple. You lay at a lower price than you back at, you back at a higher price than you lay at, and you net the profit between the two. So the complication comes with trying to find situations where you can anticipate that the price is going to move in one direction or another. But actually it's not that difficult. If you think about it logically, there are loads of situations where this can occur quite naturally within a sport. And as we head into Royal Ascot Week, as I'm doing this video, it's beautiful weather. And that holds the key to a trade that is going to occur, that you will be able to identify and take advantage of as we move through this week. There are three factors to this particular trade. We need a racetrack, we need a horse, and we also need this. This is a cumulonimbus cloud, or a potential thunderstorm, and that is what we're likely to get on the card this week. The first 2 days of Ascot this week are going to be beautiful. They're going to be very sunny and warm. But as we move through the week, I feel like a weather presenter now. We're actually going to see some low pressure move in. That's going to create the potential for thunderstorms, and the potential for thunderstorms creates a lot of potential for rain and torrential downpours. Now, what's the significance of this? Well, if you're into horse racing, you'll know immediately what the significance of this is. And that is that certain horses like certain ground conditions. Some of them like a bit of a cut in the ground, some of them don't, some of them prefer the ground to be on the softer side. But basically each individual horse will have a preference for the type of ground that it prefers to run on. When the weather's lovely and nice and warm like this, not only will I come outside to shoot a video, but you will find that racecourses tend to water the grounds to keep the conditions absolutely perfect for racing thoroughbred horses. If the ground gets too dry, then a lot of horses won't run and there will be withdrawals. If the ground is too wet, then a lot of horses won't run as well. But during particularly a large horse racing meeting, something like an Ascot where the prize money is absolutely massive, there's a tendency to run horses even if the ground isn't absolutely perfect, because of course, you know, you're in with a chance of winning a substantial amount of money and getting some of these big prestigious prizes. So as a consequence, when you are likely to get changing ground conditions, then you will actually get the odds on the horses shift as it adjusts for ground that these horses either like or dislike. And that's exactly the scenario that is lining up this week at Royal Ascot. We have 2 days of beautiful sunshine and nice warm weather where they'll almost inevitably have to water to keep the conditions absolutely perfect. But as we head towards the back end of Ascot Week this year, the forecast is for all of that to change. And as a consequence, we could see the potential for persistent rain, but more specifically, we could see thunderstorms heading over that will dump enormous amounts of rain onto the course. And what will happen at that point? Well, if you have horses that dislike the going, then necessarily their prices will drift, and the opposite will happen for horses that prefer perhaps slightly softer ground. And this is something that you can anticipate, but the strange way that you're going to do this is you're going to be watching the weather like a hawk. You're going to be keeping an eye on those thunderstorms, perhaps looking at the weather radar to see where they are and if they are going to affect Ascot. But that will definitely create movement within the market, because bettors and punters, traders, everybody will be anticipating that the price on these horses will change, and they will either take a position or trade it with the anticipation of that. So it's definitely going to happen this week. We don't know precisely when, because that's going to be down to the weather, and until the horses are declared on certain days of the week and we know that they're definitely running, we don't know which horses it will affect at this particular moment in time. But if you keep your ear to the ground and your eyes on the weather radar, you'll be able to anticipate that. You will actually see it showing up in price activity within the market as well. So even if you don't have that specific knowledge, it's very likely that you will pick up on this type of activity as we move through the week. And you will also get comments from trainers, from commentators, that will give you a clue as to where the situation is likely to occur. So it's always worth keeping your eye out on this during one of these meetings, especially this week, because we know that the weather is definitely going to change, and that will definitely have an impact on the market. So when did this last happen? Last year. We had Stradivarius that doesn't like particularly soft ground. And as the weather changed over the course of the meeting, there was lots of speculation about whether Stradivarius would run or not, and necessarily that directly affected the price. If the weather gets worse unexpectedly, then that will affect the price more than if it's just a steady drizzle that gets into the ground. But nonetheless, we definitely did see this happen on Stradivarius last year. And if you actually go to pretty much any website, I've chosen a free one for you here, you can actually look at their stats and it will give you an indication as to whether they are likely to be having a preference for one type of ground or another. And the feeling overall across the whole horse racing community was that Stradivarius didn't particularly like soft ground. It had won on soft ground before, but it wasn't considered to be an ideal condition for it. Now, the fact is Stradivarius did win anyway, but nonetheless that preference in going did have an effect on its price. And if you go back to 2019, we had exactly the same thing happen on Sea of Stars. And that was a debate about whether the horse would run at all, because the weather was fairly persistently bad in 2019. And as we actually went through that build up to the race, there was a lot of speculation on the internet, and particularly with the trainer William Haggis, about whether the horse would run. Now, in the event that you lay something with the anticipation that the price is drifting and the horse gets withdrawn, all bets are void. So you've got nothing to lose. You just don't have a trade or a bet on that particular race at all. However, if the horse does run, then obviously the price will drift, and that will be reflected within the market, and that will give you a profitable trade. So you sort of can't lose when conditions are likely to be deteriorating. And in this particular year, William Haggis was sort of umming and ahhing about whether to do it or not. And when he made the decision to actually race, then necessarily not only did the price drift, but it got an extra bump at the end. Why? Because the conditions were absolutely terrible. When we look at the start of the race that year, it was absolutely bucketing down, and the conditions were just getting worse and worse by the minute, but it was too late by then to do anything about it, and necessarily that had to be reflected in the price. So yeah, there are lots of ways to look at this particular characteristic. During traditional meetings, it's a little bit more subtle than this, but during big meetings where horses are much more likely to run, even if the ground is unsuitable, you tend to see an extension of this characteristic. And the interesting thing about it is we are seeing the future. We can see what the weather forecast is. We know how that's going to affect the going, and we know that the going change will affect the chance of a horse winning the race. And we know that if the going change affects the chance of the horse winning the race, then that will be reflected in the odds, and you can bet or trade on that basis. So, it's a trade that is easy to understand. You know when that situation is likely to occur. All you need to do is a little bit of research on the runners on that particular day of the race and which ones of them will be affected by the going. But you will hear that from the commentary anyway, especially at a high profile meeting. That's one of the things that they will always be talking about. So yeah, that's a trade that you will be able to do this week. You know it's going to occur. You just need to do a little bit of groundwork to get your positions in on the right horse, and keep an eye on the weather. It's that simple. There's nothing complicated about it. It's perfectly possible to do. I've done it over a large number of years, and it tends to be a repeating pattern at this time of year at Royal Ascot. Anyhow, I hope that video has been useful for you.